From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
I don't think that I know a teacher that does not work a second job at all. Like, every teacher I know has at least 2 jobs, some have 3, and I know one teacher who has 6 other jobs.
Schools across West Virginia are closed for an 8th day as more than 23,000 teachers and staff remain on strike, demanding higher wages and better health care. It's the biggest wildcat strike in years. And we go to Britain, where university lecturers are also on strike. Plus, teachers in Oklahoma are considering launching their own strike. Then to the Oscars.
On Oscar night, this is the dream we tell. A land where dreamers live and freedom dwells. Immigrants get the benefits. We put up monuments for the feminists. Tell the NRA they in God's way. And to the people of Parkland, we say Ashe. Sentiments of love for the people from Africa, Haiti to Puerto Rico.
As Common denounces the NRA at the Oscars, Mexican director Guillermo del Toro takes home the night's 2 biggest prizes, Best Picture and Best Director, for his film The Shape of Water. While the Me Too movement has rocked Hollywood, women just won 6 Oscars this year compared to 33 men. We'll speak to April Rain, creator of the viral hashtag #OscarsSoWhite, and Soraya Chumali of Women's Media Center Speech Project. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Syria, thousands of civilians are fleeing a government-led offensive against the suburb of eastern Ghouta outside capital Damascus. More than 600 civilians have been killed in recent days by Syrian government airstrikes and artillery fire. Human rights activists are accusing the Syrian government of waging a scorched earth campaign against civilians in the suburb, which is controlled by anti-government rebels. The Syrian government, backed by Russian air power, is waging the offensive in violation of a UN Security Council ceasefire and a daily 5-hour ceasefire brokered by Russia, which is the Syrian government's main backer. On Sunday, Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad said he would continue the offensive.
الحالة الإنسانية التي يتحدث بها الغرب على مختلف مستويات ومن وقت
The
لآخر.
humanitarian situation, which the West speaks of from time to time, is a very ridiculous lie, as ridiculous as the Western officials who repeat it. There is no contradiction between a truce and the combat operations. The advancement achieved yesterday and the day before in Ghouta by the Arab Syrian army took place in the midst of this truce.
The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Zeid Ra'ad al-Hussein, says the Syrian government's military offensive in eastern Ghouta likely constitutes war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Once again, I must emphasize that what we are seeing in eastern Ghouta and elsewhere in Syria are likely war crimes and potentially crimes against humanity. Civilians are being pounded into submission or death. The perpetrators of these crimes must know that they are being identified.
In the United States, President Trump has praised Chinese President Xi Jinping for consolidating power and doing away with presidential term limits, saying, quote, "He's now president for life. I think it's great. Maybe we'll have to give that a shot someday," unquote. CNN reports Trump made the comments during a closed-door meeting with Republican donors at Trump's private Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. Special counsel Robert Mueller is reportedly investigating whether the Trump administration's Middle East policy has been swayed by money from the United Arab Emirates and whether this money inspired President Trump to endorse a UAE and Saudi-led blockade against Qatar. Mueller is reportedly focusing on businessman George Nader, an advisor to the ruler of the United Arab Emirates, who frequently visited the White House last year. Reports have surfaced that Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor Jared Kushner's father directly asked Qatar's Minister of Finance to invest in the Kushner company's critically distressed property, 666 Fifth Avenue. Qatar refused to invest in the property. That was in April 2017. Only 1 month later, Jared Kushner encouraged the Trump administration to back the Saudis and Emiratis in the blockade against Qatar, despite the opposition of Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. The Senate slated to roll back key financial regulations passed in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. A new bill, which will come up for a procedural vote this week, would exempt 25 of the nation's 40 largest banks from being subject to heightened scrutiny by the Federal Reserve. If it passes, it would be the biggest weakening of the Dodd-Frank Act since it was signed into law in 2010. At Central Michigan University, a 19-year-old student shot and killed his parents inside his dorm room after they arrived to pick him up for spring break. The shooting sent the campus into lockdown mode. It was the 12th school shooting so far this year. Authorities say the alleged gunman, James Eric Davis Jr., had been sent to the hospital the previous day for erratic behavior. In Florida, the state Senate met for a rare session this weekend in which lawmakers voted down a proposal to ban assault rifles in the wake of the Valentine's Day massacre at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, in which 17 students and teachers were killed. The Florida Senate did vote to spend $67 million to train teachers to carry guns with the aim of putting 10 armed teachers into every school in Florida. The vote Saturday on proposed amendments to the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act. The full bill is expected to be passed by the state Senate today and then be sent to the Florida House. Record-breaking snowstorms battered parts of Europe, Canada, and the United States, where at least 8 people were killed amidst the blizzards. Canada's eastern province of Ontario saw the heaviest snowfall in nearly 20 years. Parts of Europe experienced temperatures colder than at the North Pole, which is currently experiencing unprecedented warm temperatures. Researchers say the extreme weather is likely linked to climate change. In Italy, voters went to the polls Sunday for a parliamentary election in which far-right and populist parties scored big wins. No one party won a majority, however, meaning Italy will now face weeks of negotiations aimed at forming a coalition government. Israeli soldiers shot and killed a Palestinian farmer on his own land in the Gaza Strip near the border with Israel on Saturday. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., hundreds of people gathered Sunday to protest the annual policy conference held by the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, better known as AIPAC, as Prime Minister Netanyahu comes to the United States. Back here, schools across West Virginia are closed for an 8th day as more than 20,000 teachers and 13 school staffers remain on strike, demanding higher wages and better health care. The strike, which began February 22nd, has shut down every public school in West Virginia. Teachers are demanding a 5% raise and a cap on spiraling health care costs. We'll go to West Virginia for more on the strike after headlines. An expose by BuzzFeed has revealed more than 300 officers with the New York Police Department have been allowed to keep their jobs despite having committed fireable offenses, including using excessive force against civilians, driving under the influence of alcohol, selling drugs, and sexually harassing fellow officers. The investigation is based on hundreds of pages of internal police files covering offenses committed from 2011 to 2015. In Slovakia, thousands of people took to the streets and cities across the country Friday to protest the killing of prominent investigative journalist Jan Kuciak and his partner. At the time of the murders, Kuciak was investigating tax fraud by people associated with Slovakia's ruling party. Slovakia's president has called for snap elections in the wake of the killing. And the 90th Academy Awards were held Sunday night, where the majority of the awards went to white men, despite years of activism demanding increased racial and gender diversity in Hollywood. The awards show came on the heels of the Me Too and Time's Up movements, which shook Hollywood when dozens of actresses came forward to accuse Hollywood's most powerful movie mogul, Harvey Weinstein, of rape, sexual assault, and harassment that has stretched back for decades. During Sunday night's awards, many presenters celebrated immigrants, diversity, and women's movements. This is Lupita Nyong'o and Kumail Nanjiani presenting the award for achievement in production design.
Like everyone in this room and everyone watching at home, we are dreamers. We grew up dreaming of one day working in the movies. Dreams are the foundation of Hollywood, and dreams are the foundation of America.
And so, to all the dreamers out there, we stand with you.
One of the most powerful moments of the night was when rapper Common and musician Andra Day took to the stage to perform the song Stand Up for Something from the film Marshall about the first black Supreme Court Justice, Thurgood Marshall. This is Common speaking at the performance's opening.
On Oscar night, this is the dream we tell. A land where dreamers live and freedom dwells. Immigrants get the benefits. We put up monuments for the feminists. Tell the NRA they in God's way. And to the people of Parkland, we say Ashe. Sentiments of love for the people from Africa, Haiti to Puerto Rico.
Common and Andra Day were joined on stage by Black Lives Matter co-founder Patrisse Khan-Cullors, Me Too founder Tarana Burke, legendary civil rights activist Dolores Huerta, Planned Parenthood's Cecile Richards. But despite the displays on stage, many of the night's top winners were still white men. Among the exceptions, the film Get Out, which won Best Original Screenplay for its writer, the director Jordan Peele. The top winner of the night was The Shape of Water, which won Best Picture and the Best Director award for its Mexican director Guillermo del Toro. We'll have more on this year's Oscars and why the Oscars are still so white and male later in the broadcast. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. Schools across West Virginia are closed for an 8th day as more than 20,000 teachers and 13,000 school staffers remain on strike, demanding higher wages and better health care. The walkout, which began on February 22nd, has shut down every public school in the state across 55 counties. It's the largest wildcat strike in years. Teachers are demanding a 5% raise and a cap on spiraling health care costs. Over a week, teachers have been rallying outside the state capitol in Charleston, urging lawmakers to approve a pay raise, but the state Senate and House have failed to come to an agreement.
Senator Bernie Sanders praised the striking teachers over the weekend, tweeting, 100 years ago, West Virginia coal miners helped lead the struggle for fair wages and dignity on the job. Today, the teachers of West Virginia are carrying on that brave tradition. I stand with them in their fight for justice and dignity. We're joined now by two guests. Jay O'Neill is a middle school teacher, a union activist in Charleston, West Virginia. Mike Elk is senior labor reporter at Payday Report. He also writes for The Guardian. Elk has been covering the West Virginia teachers' strike extensively. His most recent piece is headlined, West Virginia Teacher Strike Fever Starting to Spread to Other States. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Jay O'Neill, let's begin with you in Charleston, West Virginia. Why don't you lay out the scene right now, why teachers and staff have been on strike for 8 days?
Good morning. Yes, we've been on strike for 8 days. This goes back years. Starting salaries for teachers here with a bachelor's is about $33,000. And the biggest root issue of everything is our insurance. The acronym is PEIA. It stands for Public Employees Insurance Agency. And basically, our state government has not been funding it adequately for years. And so every year there are new cuts. There's public hearings every November, and they basically tell you how much worse the insurance is going to get. This year they proposed moving to something called total family income, and so basing our premiums on the income of everyone in our family. So for instance, my spouse has another job and works, and so they would base not just on my income, but on her income as well, which meant my premium was going to double. And there's a lot of teachers who, both of them, work in the school system, and they were going to see their premiums double too. And I think people have just had enough, and they've decided they're not listening to us when we try to lobby, when we try to call, and so we've got to do something big. We've got to walk out to get them to listen.
Now, Jay O'Neill, this is a wildcat strike. Could you talk about the laws in terms of striking in West Virginia and the role of the union leaders? Because as I understand it, there are two teachers' unions that represent different portions of the workforce in West Virginia.
Sure. We don't have collective bargaining here for teachers, and so teachers don't have to join a union. We have two unions, the West Virginia Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers in West Virginia. But at any given school, you might have teachers who are a member of one or the other or neither. And so without having collective bargaining, we actually don't have the right to strike as public employees. But people just felt like they didn't have any other option. In West Virginia right now, we have over 700 unfilled vacancies as far as teaching positions. And so I think we thought, I mean, really, who are they going to replace us with? At this point, we don't feel like we have a lot of other options.
So in the absence of an organized effort by the unions, how were you able to pull everyone out across the entire state? How did that happen?
Sure. So a lot of organizing early on happened on Facebook. People connected over this grievance with the insurance. And as things began to build and develop, some of the southern counties, which historically is where kind of our labor militancy has happened, decided that they were going to do a one-day walkout. And I think that really spurred the rest of the counties on. You know, we watched it. Some of it was live streamed up here at the Capitol. We watched it, and it kind of motivated the rest of us to say, you know, we want to take a step, we want to make an impact like they have too. And so the unions did come together and kind of call for a statewide walkout, I believe on February 22nd. And where this thing turned wildcat was they basically had met with the governor after the first, I guess, 4 days of the strike and said, you know, we've got an agreement worked out, a 5% pay raise. We're going to freeze the insurance, and we're also going to put a task force together to figure out a way to keep the premiums from going up and to try to really fix it. And I think the teachers at this point we're cynical. We've seen this happen before with our legislature and our government, and we said, you know, we're staying out till we see pen to paper, till it's signed, and that we know it's all gone through.
I want to go to one of the striking teachers speaking outside the state capitol.
I don't think that I know a teacher that does not work a second job at all. Like, every teacher I know has at least 2 jobs, some have 3, and I know one teacher who has 6 other jobs.
So let's bring in Mike Elk, who's been reporting on this from the beginning and extensively on West Virginia in general. Mike, put this in the broader context and the politics of West Virginia right now, where the legislature went back last week on what the agreement was.
Well, Amy, you know, I grew up partially in West Virginia. My father worked there as an organizer, trying to organize a plant in Parkersburg, West Virginia, a GE plant. And I worked there as a union organizer myself after college. As we've seen in West Virginia politics, there's a real history of big mass walkouts of this type to affect large-scale change. It's something that people remember. It's something that a lot of these teachers saw their parents' generation do. In 1969, there was a huge walkout of 40,000 coal miners striking for black lung benefits, a disease that at the time the government was denying them benefits for. So there's been a history of these successful mass-scale walkouts throughout West Virginia history, going back decades. And it's something that lives in the political consciousness of that state. However, what we're seeing here, we haven't seen in decades in any state in America, which is really an entire state going out on a wildcat strike. The closest comparison I've seen of this was in 2011 during the Wisconsin Capitol occupation, when teachers all over the state went out on strike for 2 days against the Scott Walker anti-union bill. However, after 2 days, they went back in. So we're really in uncharted territories in terms of recent labor history. And it's not quite clear when this wildcat is going to end, because right now the state legislature and the governor's office are trying to pass a bill that would raise pay by 5%. Currently, the state Senate passed a bill that would raise pay by only 4%. It's going to go to conference committee today. It's unclear what will come out of that. However, even if they just pass the pay raises, it's not clear that teachers will go back in. The main issue and the sticking point has always been fixing the PEIA insurance program, the one that was talked about earlier. Currently, the governor of the state is proposing an increased tax on natural gas to pay for that. However, the Republicans in the state legislature and their allies in the fossil fuel industry are dead set against an increased tax on natural gas. So this could all be easily fixed if there was just a tax on natural gas. However, it doesn't appear that the traditional fossil fuel industries in West Virginia want to see that tax go through to end this teacher strike.
Well, Mike, you talk about the uncharted waters that we're in terms of the labor movement nationwide, but there's also the teachers in Oklahoma are very close to potentially going on strike. Could you talk about the ripple effects, given the fact that teachers across America have been under assault by conservative forces now for years, that this might have, that the West Virginia strike may have?
Well, I'm right here in Pittsburgh, which is about 45 minutes from the West Virginia border. We saw last week the effect that West Virginia was having. The Pittsburgh Federation of Teachers voted to strike last Monday. By Wednesday, they gave a 96-hour notice when they voted to strike. By that Wednesday, the school district had folded and given them everything they wanted. And so we're starting to see that effect already play out here in Pittsburgh. In neighboring states to West Virginia, in Kentucky, as well as in southwestern Pennsylvania, there has been talk of striking in districts where the governor, Jim Justice, owns money. Now, the billionaire governor of West Virginia is also one of the largest landowners and coal owners in the state. He owes something like $15 million in taxes in 6 different states. And there's been talks in counties and neighboring states where he owes money of striking in solidarity as a one-day sign. Now, it looks like there's a lot of talk in Oklahoma of striking sometime in early April. This is certainly inspiring a lot of action, and it's particularly interesting because it's coming at the same time as the walkouts over the Parkland massacre. So we're getting to this period where people really get a sense of walking out, and as the teacher who was talking earlier brought up, social media is really reinforcing this and breaking through the way people talk. Because you can see photos day after day on social media, and it really reinforces this sense among people that are striking that they have a lot of support, that they know their neighbors have their backs because they see their neighbors posting that. And in West Virginia right now, I think the teachers are blown away by how much public support they have. And I don't think that the governor has moved yet in major ways to seek injunctions against the strike because he knows it would fire politically.
Let's go to an Oklahoma teacher speaking at a recent school board meeting in Bartlesville, Oklahoma.
1 out of 5 Oklahoma school districts have been forced to adopt a 4-day school week. And a 2017 study from the University of Oklahoma shows that teachers who leave the state, on average, receive a $19,000 pay increase. So tonight, we are especially grateful for a superintendent who is standing up for our teachers and students. We stand alongside our administration, our administrative leadership, in calling for a restoration of proper funding for our public schools. Unless Oklahoma receives a miraculous windfall to fix the problems that we face, the BEA is calling for the suspension of classes so that we may petition our state lawmakers to repair the damage done over the years of fiscal irresponsibility. We did it in 1990, and we're ready to do it again.
We're going to go to break and then come back to the activism that's taking place in this country. And we're going to go to Britain, where lecturers are striking across the country. We've been speaking with Jay O'Neill, middle school teacher on strike. He's in Charleston, West Virginia. We'll continue with him and Mike Elk, who's writing all about it, but also grew up in West Virginia, of Payday Reports. Stay with us.
Oh, worthless treasure. True worth is only measured not by what you got, but what you got in your heart. It all means nothing if you don't stand up for something. And I stand up for you, self-respect, dignity. If that's all you got, then you got all you need. And without that,
dance between love and hate. Don't know the date, so we stay awake. A knee we take for our soul's sake. New victory off of old faith. A president that chose with hate. He don't control our fate because God is great. When they go low, we stay in the heights. I stand for peace, love, and women's rights.
Andra Day and Common singing Stand Up for Something from the film Marshall about the first black Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. Common and Andra Day were joined on stage by Black Lives Matter co-founder Patrisse Khan-Cullors, Me Too founder Tarana Burke, legendary civil rights activist Dolores Huerta, a Syrian refugee child named Bana Alabed, Cecile Richards, the head of Planned Parenthood, and others. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, public school teachers in West Virginia are not the only educators on strike. In Britain, thousands of lecturers, researchers, librarians, and workers at over 60 universities have been engaging in strikes and other labor actions to demand fair pensions. The actions began on February 22nd. We now go to Cambridge, where we're joined by Priya Gopal. She is a university lecturer at the Faculty of English at Cambridge, who is participating in the academic strike. She's a member of the University and College Union. Welcome to Democracy Now! Could you talk to us? Could you talk to us about the strike and how it has unfolded at the various universities around the UK?
Okay, yes. First of all, I'd like to send solidarity on behalf of the university teachers in Britain who are striking to our colleagues and co-workers in West Virginia. We've been on strike as well since the 22nd of this month. Academics in Britain are not hugely well paid, but what we have been able to expect in recent decades is a modest guaranteed pension. In recent years, this has been subjected to erosion, but the newest proposal, which has come to us from the employers' body, the Universities UK or UUK, actually offer a very damaging scenario in which many of us stand to lose as much as half of our expected pensions. In other words, we would be facing quite serious poverty in our old age. Just to give you a sense of the numbers, a young lecturer starting out now who would retire, say, 35 years from now, could have expected to get about $30,000 equivalent in pensions after paying into her or his pensions for a lifetime. If the new proposals go through, they would earn as little as $14,000 to $15,000 a year, and this would be after paying into a pensions fund 35 years into service. And this is, of course, not, in many cases, would be well below a living wage.
And talk about you mentioned the solidarity, what we are seeing right now from Britain, how you're keeping in touch with the striking teachers and staff in West Virginia, which we're going to be talking more about, the staff joining the teachers, and then the word of possible strikes in places like Oklahoma.
Well, as you suggested in your report, social media has been quite crucial to this. So we were very, very heartened to see that striking teachers in West Virginia posted a picture of themselves holding up a placard sending us solidarity. And I think there is a kind of collective awareness now in Britain and I think in America that these struggles, which are really against the erosion of the public sector, which are really against the erosion of the idea of education as a public good, that these are in fact shared struggles. And in many ways, the enemies we face are fundamentally ideological. They are people in this country and in that who want to take education away from the public sector as a shared good that all people should have access to, and turn it into a privatized commodity. I should remind you that in Britain, historically, the university sector has been a public sector, and until quite recently, students didn't pay fees at all. And in recent years, we've seen fees at first being imposed, and then in one fell movement in 2010, despite protests, being tripled, and that this is practically overnight. So I think there is a real sense in Britain that this is a struggle to keep the provision of education, both in schools and in colleges, a public good that everybody should have access to. And I think that our colleagues in West Virginia recognize this, and they also recognize that university teachers and school teachers work extremely hard and deserve a very basic pay and pension as emoluments for the work that they do.
Well, your strike includes not just the lecturers, but also researchers and other workers at the librarians and other workers at the universities. But it does not have 100% support, right? There are many professors and others who are not striking. Could you talk about that, the divisions that exist among the workforce, and also the response of the government to the strike?
Yes, I mean, look, we live in Britain post-Thatcher, and Thatcher's assault on unions and the fact of unionizing is a legacy that this country still grapples with. And only about half the university workforce, just over half the university workforce, is unionized at all. And so it is true that classes haven't come to a complete halt, that there are people who are continuing to teach or do their work. But on the other hand, this is the single biggest strike in the education sector, in the higher education sector, that we have seen in its history. So what is actually heartening is not the numbers of people who are not in the strike, but the daily increasing numbers of people who are joining the union and participating in the industrial action. And I think that given the legacy of anti-union rhetoric and anti-union politics in this country, it is quite remarkable that a typically non-confrontational sector like the professoriate is coming out in force onto the picket lines and into withdrawing their labor until such time as Universities UK decides to come and retain the benefits that we're entitled to. I should also say that the proposed changes are very clearly mainly ideological. They're being proposed on the basis of a huge deficit that is a completely speculative projection. The pension scheme is actually in rude good health. And the proposed cuts are on the basis of an apocalyptic scenario where the entire sector goes under. So I think there is a recognition across the sector, amongst the student body and with many members of the public, that what we're up against is an ideological project of attacking pensions and services and trying to kind of privatize the risk rather than for the employers to carry it on as has historically been the case.
I wanted to go to an excerpt of a video introducing the university and college union strike of British academics and researchers and librarians and staff.
The UCU has called for 14 days of action across 4 weeks. During this time, staff will not be teaching, answering emails, giving office hours, or marking.
The Universities UK's management wants to destroy the pension scheme. Some staff will lose as much as 40% of their pensions, but management refuse to budge or even bargain.
This dispute is about pensions, but it's also about marketisation. Pensions are being cut, staff are being casualised, and students are paying massive fees. These issues are all linked.
Before we go back to talk about what more is happening in West Virginia, Priya Gopal, how has the British government responded, and what are your plans? What's the timetable for this strike?
Currently, the government has simply taken the stance that talks are good. And in fact, I think one of the successes of the strike so far is that the Universities UK, from having taken a very intractable position, have now agreed to come to the table and talk. So the talks are starting today. But I think it needs to be made clear that university lecturers are not really going to settle for vague promises of talking. We have a very clear goal in mind, and that is the retention of our right to defined benefits as was promised in our pensions packages. So I can't tell you what the exact timeline for the strike is. It's scheduled to continue well into next week. We then all break for Easter, and we come back in the Easter term at the end of April and May. And if there haven't been substantial changes, substantial progress made on the talks, then as you just heard in the video, we will continue on to a marking boycott, at which point exams won't be marked and students won't be able to graduate because they won't be marked. I should say also that we've had tremendous amounts of support from students. We've been extremely moved by the support that our own students have given us in the form of emails, letters, petitions to the vice chancellors and to the government, as well as literally coming and standing with us on the picket lines.
Well, last week, Democracy Now! Spoke to Randy Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers, about what's happening in West Virginia, the teachers and staff strike there.
There's no collective bargaining in West Virginia. So it is whatever we lobby the legislature and the governor, and we got to a deal, so to speak, of increasing salaries by 5% this year. It's, you know, it is not enough because of what West Virginia teachers make, and they need to make more, and to actually freeze the premiums for about 18 months. The problem is the bills have not actually gone through a very hostile House and Senate, and no one trusts the governor. And so until some of these bills go through and there's a task force that actually takes on these huge premium hikes over the long term, you have a lot of confusion.
That was Randy Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers. I wanted to go back to Jay O'Neill. This whole issue of West Virginia being in the forefront historically of labor strikes. Many of the teachers of today are children or grandchildren of mine workers in West Virginia. Could you talk about this sense of history that the teachers are participating in and what you expect to happen in the next few days?
Sure. If you see videos or clips of people here, you'll see a lot of teachers wearing red bandanas around their necks, and that kind of goes back to some of the early history here of labor activism. We had a thing called the West Virginia Mine Wars in the 19-teens and early 1920s. It kind of culminated in something called the Battle of Blair Mountain, which was the largest armed uprising in United States history outside of the Civil War. A lot of the miners then wore red bandanas around their necks, and some people think that's where the term redneck came from. So you're seeing that memory here and that coming up again. And as it was kind of hinted earlier, almost every West Virginian knows somebody who's been on strike. Parents, grandparents, friends, aunts, uncles, just somebody. So it's a rich history here, and people know what it means to be on strike. As far as what happens next, basically we have an executive order from the governor for a task force for our insurance. So as Randy Weingarten said, we're hopeful that they can get the costs under control. The biggest issue right now is the 5% raise. The Senate lowered it to 4%. The House said, no, we still want 5%. And the governor said he supports 5%. So we're waiting on a conference committee right now. It could be meeting any time to try to iron that out and hopefully give us the 5%.
I wanted to read the tweet of the acclaimed author Barbara Ehrenreich, who wrote, "A lot of children depend on free school lunches, so the West Virginia teachers made food packages for them before going on strike and have continued to try to feed them. This is our dystopian welfare state, severely underpaid teachers trying to keep poverty-stricken kids alive." This is quite amazing, Jay. As you sit there in the Capitol building, in the reception area, what do you see happening? 8 days out, over 270,000 kids not going to school now, 33,000 teachers and the staff that are supporting you in this.
You know, we've had a lot of community support. As she was talking about, teachers all over the state have worked to make sure kids are not going hungry. I know at my school, something like 70 backpacks full of food were sent home with kids. We also sent home flyers for churches and community centers that had organized food and meals for them, because that's the state we're in. You know, we are in a high poverty state. Most of our kids depend on breakfast and lunch coming from school. So we're in this situation where we feel like as teachers we still have to make sure our students, you know, are being fed during this time.
I just want to ask Mike Elko one question. West Virginia obviously is generally known these days as Trump country, yet the president hasn't made any statement about what's going on in West Virginia. Could you talk about that?
Well, you know, I think it's interesting, this idea of Trump country, because while, you know, a lot of these folks at the top of the ballot have been voting Republican, down the ballot they still vote Democratic. And, you know, even if you get into southwestern Pennsylvania nearby, you'll hear a lot of very socially conservative folks who are still very socially conservative with the National Party, but still very economically populist. And I think Trump knows, for the amount of support these teachers are getting, that he doesn't want to go against his base in this situation. Because, you know, I don't know the breakdown necessarily of where all these teachers voted, but West Virginia did vote by nearly 70% for, you know, Donald Trump. So for him to not want to talk about this shows you that he's really scared of taking on unions head on. You know, he's obviously taking on unions in a backdoor approach at the NLRB and in Congress and in other ways. But he doesn't want to do a full-scale Scott Walker assault because he knows that's his base in places like Ohio and in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
Well, we're going to leave it there, but of course continue to follow these strikes. Jay O'Neill, middle school teacher on strike in Charleston, West Virginia, speaking to us from the state Capitol building. Mike Elk of Payday Report will link to your reports, and Priya Gopal speaking to us from Cambridge, a university lecturer there who is on strike, a member of the University and College Union. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, last night, the Oscars. Was it historic in this Me Too, Time's Up moment? 6 women win awards, 33 men. We'll be joined by the founder of Oscars So White. Does that continue to be true? And more. Stay with us.
Greed is a monster, but love is stronger, stronger than them all. What that can hurt, I don't wanna fight. No lines in the sand, I'm on your side. Invisible, no color lines. It's time we put our differences aside. Time tells no lies. It keeps changing and ticking and moving, then passes by. But if you're lucky, it will be kind. Oh, like a river, flowing through time. Oh, let it wash it clean. Rolling upstream.
Mary J. Blige singing Mighty River Sunday night at the Oscars from the film Mudbound. Mary J. Blige made history last night by becoming the first person to be nominated for Best Original Song and for Best Supporting Actress. This is Democracy Now! To democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, the 90th Academy Awards were held Sunday night, where the majority of the awards went to white men, despite years of activism demanding increased racial and gender diversity in Hollywood. The award show came on the heels of the Me Too and Time's Up movements, which rocked Hollywood, and after dozens of actresses came forward to accuse Hollywood's most powerful producer, Harvey Weinstein, of rape, sexual assault, and harassment that stretched back decades. While the Me Too movement has shaken Hollywood in recent months, women won just 6 Oscars this year, compared to 33 for men.
Some notable winners on Sunday included Mexican director Guillermo del Toro, who took home the night's two biggest prizes, Best Picture and Best Director for his film The Shape of Water. Jordan Peele became the first African-American to win for Best Original Screenplay for his film Get Out. During Sunday night's awards, many presenters celebrated immigrants, diversity, women's movements. This is Lupita Nyong'o and Kumail Nanjiani presenting the award for Achievement in Production Design.
Like everyone in this room and everyone watching at home, we are dreamers. We grew up dreaming of one day working in the movies. Dreams are the foundation of Hollywood, and dreams are the foundation of America.
And so, to all the dreamers out there, we stand with you.
One of the most powerful moments of the night was when rapper Common and musician Andra Day took to the stage to perform the song Stand Up for Something from the film Marshall, about the first black Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. This is how Common opened the performance.
On Oscar night, this is the dream we tell. A land where dreamers live and freedom dwells. Immigrants get the benefits. We put up monuments for the feminists. Tell the NRA they in God's way. And to the people of Parkland, we say Ashe. Sentiments of love for the people from Africa, Haiti to Puerto Rico.
We're joined right now by two guests. April Rain, creator of the viral hashtag #OscarsSoWhite and senior director of marketing for Fractured Atlas, a nonprofit arts service group. Soraya Chemaly is a journalist who covers the intersection of gender and politics, director of the Women's Media Center Speech Project. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! April, let's begin with you. You were up late last night, I should say this morning, as you tweeted for Color of Change.
Yes.
Talk about your take on the Oscars last night.
Well, I think that it was an important moment for both the Me Too and the Time's Up movement. However, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in front of and behind the camera. I mean, you had several hours of pre-Oscar show with Ryan Seacrest as the host, and yet he has been accused of sexual assault. And so one wonders why he would even have him standing in front, right? We had Gary Oldman win last night, and there were allegations about him as well. And so there's still a lot to be done, and there seems to be some inconsistency with respect to who is pushed to the side and who is allowed to continue in their regular job. In addition, with respect to the diversity of the nominees, you know, as you said, Jordan Peele was the first black person and just the second person of color to win Best Original Screenplay in 90 years. And so the fact that we are still talking about firsts is a problem because what we know is that representation matters and diversity sells. So if Hollywood still chooses not to be more inclusive, more diverse, both in front of and behind the camera, they are literally leaving money on the table.
And Soraya Chemaly, your thoughts on what you saw last night, and again, that there were many more African Americans and Latinos nominated, but not that many won this year, and also the issue of how few women actually ended up winning awards.
Yes, I think that what we saw was a little bit of window dressing. The Oscar voters remain remarkably homogenous, so we're talking over 90% male, still more than 3/4 white, and I think we see that reflected in the voting. I mean, I do think it's notable, for example, there was the best film, the winner had a female protagonist. That's the first time in 13 years, and it's not lost on many of us that she actually was a character that didn't speak, which is somewhat ironic in the time of Me Too. So
you're talking about Shape of Water.
Yes, Shape of Water. And so I think that there's been this press, people like April and her organization and the Women's Media Center and Gina Davis, and you know, many people have been talking about this for a long time, and I think people are really fed up with this idea that change takes time and it has to be incremental because none of this is new information. And as April points out, these are profitable films. We know that films that have diverse casts, that have women protagonists, do well at the box office. So it's really not a matter of the economics. What we're talking about is really forcing a change in the culture, which remains, I think, recalcitrant.
I mean, it's really significant that, television knows, the media knows what sells, as April and you were talking about, diversity. You could see that in the performances. In fact, the entire production, this multicultural extravaganza. But if you looked very carefully at it, the people who are actually coming up to win, the people who are presenting them were people of color and women. But one after another, it was white men, in the image of Oscar himself, the award. But I wanted to turn to Frances McDormand, who took home the Best Actress Oscar for her role in 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, about her daughter who was raped and killed. That's what the film is about. But this is Frances McDormand receiving her Oscar.
If I may be so honored to have all the female nominees in every category stand with me in this room tonight. The actors, Meryl, if you do it, everybody else will, come on. The filmmakers, the producers, the directors, the writers, the cinematographer, the composers, the songwriters, the designers. Come on. Ms. Boyne. Okay, look around, everybody. Look around, ladies and gentlemen, because we all have stories to tell and projects we need finance. Don't talk to us about it at the parties tonight. Invite us into your office in a couple days, or you can come to ours, whichever suits you best, and we'll tell you all about them. I have 2 words to leave with you tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Inclusion rider.
Inclusion writer, said Frances McDormand. As someone tweeted, the sound you're hearing right now is millions of people across the world typing the words into Google, inclusion writer, because she left it at that. April Rain, explain.
Absolutely. So an inclusion writer is basically something with a person of power, typically an actor and actress, can require in their contracts so that either the cast and or the crew will also be diverse, or they will walk off the set. We saw that Brie Larson this morning on Twitter said that she will require inclusion writers in all of her contracts going forward, and I think that's a wonderful idea. Fanchen Cox Giovanni and the USC Annenberg Institute, they're inclusionists on Twitter, have been talking about this issue for quite some time, and I'm glad to see it getting some play. It makes sense because what we know is that, again, the more diverse a cast and crew is, the better the experience for everyone, and we want to ensure that stories are being told that represent the moviegoers and the TV watchers.
I wanted to ask you, April, about one of the Oscars, probably one of the most surprising one. Kobe Bryant winning an Oscar for Best Animated Short stunned a lot of people, especially given Kobe Bryant's history also with allegations of sexual assault.
Right. Well, obviously, let's remember who the Oscar voters are, right? They are overwhelmingly white and male and older. The Academy has said that they are going to double the number of people of color and the number of women by 2020 within its ranks. And we see some of that happening. The last 2 years, they have had their most inclusive and diverse membership roles ever. So that's great. But again, Kobe Bryant is not the first, and unfortunately will not be the last person who has been accused of allegations, and still, it seems to just brush off him, and he won that award. So it feels that it's a bit tainted.
Well, let's ask Chiraya Somali that very question about Kobe Bryant, who was accused by a hotel employee, this is well over a decade ago in Colorado, of raping her. He even said in his statement, his agreement with her, that he understands she did not think this was consensual.
Yes, she refused to testify in the criminal case. And there was a follow-up civil case, and part of the agreement was that he would write a letter of apology in which he acknowledged that she did not understand that she was consenting. The description of what happened in the hotel room is fairly graphic. As April said, I think it's tainted, and it's tainted in multiple ways throughout the evening, because Gary Oldham as well, for example, was described by an ex-wife as having assaulted her while she was trying to call the police. And so it's difficult to look past these allegations. They're quite vivid. They took place, both of them, as you say, more than 10 years ago, 2001 and 2003, I believe. And so there is a sense that the art of the individual, which is a long story in and of itself, trumps any of these actions that they make. And again, I think we really can't separate that from the industry's demographics and the fact that this industry shapes narratives around power, consent, race, gender. It's not like other industries, except maybe news media in that way. It is a culture shaper. And so it does feel a little bit like a slap in the face when you see these two awards, for example, in a time when this is there's heightened awareness about these issues.
I want to turn to actors and comedians Maya Rudolph and Tiffany Haddish, who presented 2 awards at Sunday's night's Oscar ceremony.
A few years ago, people were saying that Oscars were so white. And since then, some real progress has been made.
But when we came out together, we know some of you were thinking, are the Oscars too black now?
Well, we just want to say, don't worry. There are so many more white people to come to.
So many. We just came from backstage, and there are tons of them back there.
Tons of them.
April, your response?
Well, the Oscars are still so white, you know, and I think you make a good point. The Oscars are very deliberate. So if we remember 2 years ago, Chris Rock was the host, right? And that was sort of at one of the zeniths of the Oscars so white movement. And so they seem to attempt to bring him in to placate people of color. But what we know time and time again, this is one of the reasons why I've started Aquarel, which is a multicultural media resource directory, so that individuals on both sides of the camera and both sides of the camera, both the camera and the curtain are able to self-identify in various marginalized categories, including race, sexual orientation, gender, age, disability, and so on. Very often we hear Hollywood saying, well, we want to work with this particular community, we just can't find them. And we know that there are talented individuals out there, and so this will provide the solution to Oscars So White, because they'll never again be able to say that.
And I wanted to ask you about that, especially because the real jobs in Hollywood, the actors are the window dressing, but there are thousands and thousands of jobs behind the scenes, behind the cameras, and those are the ones that the industry obviously would need to open up to as well, right?
That's exactly right. Everything starts on the page, and this is for TV or film, right? So we need more diverse screenwriters to be able to tell their stories from their point of view. So, for example, we saw Jordan Peele last night win Best Original Screenplay for Get Out. That's just one of many examples that are out there. So Aquarel will allow screenwriters and boom operators and key grips and A-list and B-list actors and actresses to sign up, and then the studios and networks can choose amongst these various categories, so that, for example, we saw last night Daniela Vega is a trans woman playing a trans woman in the movie that won Best Foreign Film, A Fantastic Woman from Chile. That was an important moment that I think people glossed over a little bit.
Let's go to Jordan Peele, who won Oscar for Best Original Screenplay for his movie Get Out, a horror thriller that examines U.S. race relations.
This means so much to me. I stopped writing this movie about 20 times because I thought it was impossible. I thought it wasn't going to work. I thought no one would ever make this movie. But I kept coming back to it because I knew if someone let me make this movie, that people would hear it and people would see it. So I want to dedicate this to all the people who raised my voice and let me make this movie. My mother, who taught me to love even in the face of hate, and to everybody who went and saw this movie, everybody who bought a ticket, who told somebody to buy a ticket. Thank you. I love you for shouting out at the theater, for shouting out at the screen. Let's keep going.
And we end it there with Jordan Peele. We want to thank April Rain, creator of the hashtag that went viral, Oscars So White. We'll see if that changes in the future. And Soraya Tremali of the Women's Media Center Speech Project, speaking to us from Washington, D.C. That does it for our broadcast. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Burke, Renee Feltz, Dina Guzder, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Gottesdiener, Sam Alcoff, John Hamilton, Ravi Karen, Hani Masood, Sharina Nadura, Nat Needham. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Go to our website for transcripts and podcasts.